There are some emergency calls that stay with dispatchers because they are violent, some because they are tragic, some because they are chaotic enough that the details blur together and only the emotional residue survives. But the calls that do the deepest damage are often the quiet ones, the ones where nobody screams, the ones where the caller is trying very hard not to cry, the ones where fear is so complete it has already moved past panic and become control. For dispatcher Hannah Vale, the call that stayed with her for the rest of her life began with a whisper. For dispatcher Hannah Vale, the call that stayed with her for the rest of her life began with a whisper, not a scream, not the sound of breaking glass, not a frantic adult begging for police. A whisper, please don't hang up. The call came in at 20:11 a.m. On a Thursday in late November during that dead stretch of the night when everything in a city feels farther apart than it does during the day. Apartment arguments feel more private. Traffic stops feel lonelier. Domestic violence calls feel heavier. Even the silence between radio updates feels more exposed. Hannah had worked overnight emergency communications for nearly 9 years by then. She had a reputation for steadiness under pressure. The kind of dispatcher patrol officers trusted because she did not fill radio space with panic and did not lose the useful details when things got ugly. She knew what fear sounded like. This did not sound like ordinary fear. It sounded trained. When line 6 lit up, she answered the way she always did. 911, what's your emergency? At first, there was nothing but breathing. Small, shallow, trembling breaths, the kind someone makes when they are trying not to let sound travel. Hannah waited half a beat, then repeated herself. 911, can you hear me? Then the whisper came, please don't hang up. The voice was a boy's yawn, maybe 8 or 9, maybe 10 at the oldest. Hannah clicked the live trace prompt with one hand and motioned toward her supervisor without taking her eyes off the screen. I'm not hanging up. Tell me what's happening. There was a rustling noise, fabric maybe, and then the child whispered, he's here. Not Simone, not there's a man. Not help, he's here. The phrasing mattered. It suggested familiarity, ongoing terror, an established danger. What's your address? Hannah asked. The child didn't answer immediately. That pause would matter later. At the time, Hannah heard it as fear. Later, investigators would hear something else too, concentration. The sound of a child reaching for something memorized. Then the address came in pieces, a house number, a street name. Then the town. He stumbled once over the name of the road and corrected himself so softly Hannah had to ask him to repeat it. She entered it immediately. The call was flagged as an active child in danger, domestic response with possible violent adult present. 2 units were sent at once. A third was floated nearby. What's your name? Oliver. How old are you? Oliver? 9. Okay, Oliver, where are you right now? In the closet. Are you alone? Number who's with you? My sister. How old is she? 5. Is she hurt? Silence. When he spoke again, his voice was flatter. She fell. This is one of the strange things about interviews and call reviews in cases like this. The meaning of a sentence often changes once people know the ending. At the time, she fell sounded like a frightened child simplifying. Later, everyone heard it differently, as avoidance, as coached language, as a phrase he had probably used before because more accurate words had once brought punishment. Hannah asked the next question carefully. Did someone make her fall? The line stayed quiet long enough that she almost repeated herself. Then he whispered, he pushed my mom. Hannah updated the log instantly. Possible female victim inside. Juveniles hiding. Unknown male still on scene. Where is your mom now? No answer. Oliver? Then, softly, she told us not to come out if he came back. That line altered the emotional temperature in the room around Hannah almost immediately. Her supervisor had moved closer by then. Another dispatcher nearby had stopped typing for a second and looked over. Calls involving hidden children always changed how a room felt. But this one had already started to feel stranger than it should have. Did he come back tonight? Yes. Do you know who he is? Number you don't know him? A pause, then one of the most unsettling lines in the entire recording. I don't know his real one. Not real. Name, real one. The grammar was childlike, the meaning was not. It suggested aliases, invented identities, a man who had been introduced under different names, or perhaps someone who had made the children call him something he wasn't. The nearest patrol car was now under 3 minutes away. Oliver, listen to me. Police are already coming. I need you to stay hidden and keep your sister quiet for me, okay? She's trying. There was a faint sound then, almost like a tiny sob cut off too quickly. Good, Hannah said. You're doing really well. Are the lights off? Yes. Is the bedroom door closed? Yes. Can you lock it? Number it doesn't lock anymore. That word anymore was one of many small details detectives would later circle in transcripts. Not, it doesn't lock anymore. Meaning it once had, or it once mattered, or the child had lived with the broken lock long enough to understand it as a changed condition, not a fixed one. Officer Matt Rees called out his arrival at the street entrance at 2:14 a.m. That timing became important enough later that it was repeated in interviews, reports, and legal briefings so many times it turned into ritual. 2 minutes and 57 seconds. From dispatch to arrival, fast. Very fast, too fast in theory for what followed to happen. Over the radio, Hannah heard Rees confirm visual on the property. Residence is dark, no movement visible, approaching. The house sat near the end of a narrow row of older homes with a shallow front porch, dead winter lawn, and dark windows that reflected almost nothing. No vehicle in the driveway. No porch light on. No sounds from inside, Hannah said. Oliver, the police are outside now. The boy took in a sudden breath. I hear something. That's them. A pause then, in a whisper that made Hannah's stomach tighten. He hears it too. Rees knocked hard and announced himself. No answer. He knocked again. Nothing. He tried the knob, unlocked. He entered. What patrol body camera later showed was not a horror movie house. No blood-spattered walls. No theatrical evidence of violence. No signs of forced struggle in the entryway. That almost made it worse. Because the house looked used, not lived in properly. But used. The living room contained a couch, an armchair, one end table, and a lamp. The kitchen had dishes in the sink, a half-open cereal box on the counter, and one child's cup near the refrigerator. Chair. There was dust in corners, but not enough to suggest true vacancy. It looked like a place people were moving through. Police, call out. Nothing. Rees cleared the living room, kitchen, and first-floor hallway while the second officer moved toward the rear and then upstairs. On the line, Hannah said, Oliver. The police are inside now. The boy answered immediately. He's downstairs. That matched what everyone still believed at the time. Stay where you are, Hannah said. They're coming up. The second officer reached the top of the stairs. 3 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a narrow hall, no visible male, no children. Then Hannah heard the child say something that did not make sense at all. Number not that one. What do you mean? She asked, before he answered. There was a faint noise through the call. A low creak. Then another wood under shifting weight, maybe. When he whispered again, fear had sharpened inside his voice. He's upstairs now. At almost the same moment, the second officer checked the first bedroom and found it empty. The second room held a mattress on the floor, children's blankets, and 1 plastic cup. No children. No man. The third was nearly bare. The closet in the children's room stood open, empty. The officer radioed, no occupants upstairs. It is difficult to overstate how quickly the emotional logic of a scene can collapse when field information stops matching the call in real time. Dispatch hears the voice. Patrol sees the house. If those things diverge too sharply, every second starts to feel unstable. Hannah pressed the headset tighter against her ear. Oliver, no answer. Oliver, talk to me. Crackling, breathing. Then one final sentence, whispered so softly that for a long time some people on review thought they had imagined it. He said, if I told you wouldn't find us in time. Then the line went dead. No click. No struggle. Just dead air. Hannah redialed instantly. Unavailable. The trace field on her system remained incomplete. Partial emergency routing, no stable callback number. No valid account registration. Not impossible in a technical sense. Prepaid devices, emergency. Only activation, dirty routing paths. Damaged SIMs could all complicate traces. But wrong enough that communications staff kept looking at the monitor as if the missing information might populate if they stared hard enough. Inside the house, patrol finished the sweep. No children, no adult male, no female victim, no one, and yet there were signs of fresh occupancy everywhere you looked closely. A bowl in the sink with milk residue not yet dried hard, a damp hand towel in the upstairs bathroom, a child-sized sneaker beneath the edge of a bed frame, an opened applesauce pouch in the upstairs trash, blankets with impressions in them. Then Rees found a child's sock half hidden beneath a radiator cover in the upstairs hall. There was blood on the heel, not enough to flood a report, more than enough to change the case. By sunrise, the house had become a crime scene. By mid-morning, Detective Sarah Leland had led. Sarah specialized in cases that sat at the ugly intersection of family violence, missing persons, and child harm. She had learned the worst investigations often began with ambiguity, not with clarity, not with clean names and known relationships. With fragments, with children who gave partial truth because full truth would get them hurt. with adult victims who had already been disappearing in small ways long before anyone realized they were gone. Her first impression of the house was simple. It was pretending to be a home. There were too many signs of occupancy for it to be empty by accident. Too few signs of real domestic life for it to be normal. Children's bedding, but almost no toys. Kitchen use, but no groceries arranged like a family shop there.
A bathroom with toothbrushes but no medication, makeup bag or laundry flow. No school papers. No bills. No mail. No photos. No chargers. No legal documents. It was a shell of family life. The house itself belonged to an estate transfer company handling the assets of a widower who had died the previous year. According to records, it was supposed to be vacant awaiting renovation. Utilities had been switched on again under a contractor maintenance account 3 weeks earlier. That meant someone had legitimate access at some level. Key code, contractor override, or lockbox entry, but not formal tenancy. Neighborhood canvas gave little. One woman said she thought she'd seen a little girl in an upstairs window 2 or 3 days prior. A man on the corner remembered cigarette smoke in the backyard late one night. Another neighbor insisted the property had been vacant because she never saw trash bins set out. No one had names. No one admitted concern. That pattern would become a theme in the case. People noticed fragments. Nobody formed a whole. Crime scene recovered 3 main categories of evidence that first day. The first was blood. Low-volume blood traces in the upstairs bathroom doorway, the sock, and 1 partial transfer mark near the baseboard of the child's room. All consistent with a young female child. The second was latent use evidence. Fingerprints too smudged to identify immediately. Hair in a bathroom brush. Food wrappers in the kitchen trash. Skin cell residue on blankets and fresh body use heat patterns in bedding. Noted early, though not precisely useful later. The third was a note. Folded into the gap behind the loose baseboard of the child's room was a strip of notebook paper with uneven block handwriting. We are here 3 words. No names. No explanation. But to Sarah, this was the first solid emotional evidence of the case. A child had tried to leave proof of presence. Not proof for a specific person, just proof as if existence itself might need documenting. That night, Hannah listened to the recording again during the mandatory incident debrief and then asked not to hear it anymore. She couldn't stop thinking about his voice when he said, "Please don't hang up." Dispatchers hear people ask for help all the time. But this had sounded less like a request for police and more like a plea not to be left alone with fear again. On day 2, audio enhancement found the first new lead. Beneath the child's whispering and Hannah's voice sat a repeating background noise. At first, technicians thought it might be static. Then maybe loose electrical hum. Then, after cleaning, it became distinct. Metal chain, hollow strike, pause, low drag, repeat. One veteran officer recognized it. Flagpole chain in wind. There was no flagpole at the property. There was, however, one behind it beyond the rear fence line. Over a narrow strip of overgrown drainage land, and beside an abandoned parking area, sat a shuttered church building. Closed for nearly 6 years. Its fellowship hall still had an old flagpole out front. That changed the search area immediately. The church had been noted but not fully entered the first night because it sat on adjacent land and no direct evidence pointed there. One veteran officer recognized it. Flagpole chain in wind. There was no flagpole at the property. There was, however, one behind it beyond the rear fence line. Over a narrow strip of overgrown drainage land, and beside an abandoned parking area, sat a shuttered church building. Closed for nearly 6 years. Its fellowship hall still had an old flagpole out front. That changed the search area immediately. The church had been noted but not fully entered the first night because it sat on adjacent land and no direct evidence pointed there. Now detectives obtained a warrant. The church offices were dusty, stale, and largely stripped of value. The sanctuary showed no recent use. But the fellowship hall basement was different. Someone had been there, not in the casual way of a transient sleeper passing through. In the organized way of intermittent occupation, blankets folded and refolded, a battery lantern, children's cough syrup, cheap bottled water, snack wrappers, 2 cartoon cups. Woman's clothing. A sweatshirt sleeve with old blood on it, and behind stacked folding tables in a maintenance closet they found the phone, a prepaid flip phone with a cracked hinge and the battery taped into place. One completed emergency call at 20:11 a.m. That was the moment the case transformed. The child had not been in the house. He had been nearby. And that meant the house address was not his location. It was a chosen location. Why? That question consumed investigators for days. Trauma confusion was one theory. Maybe he had called from darkness and instinctively described the place most associated with danger. Another theory was instruction. Someone had made him memorize that address.
A third possibility was that the house had once been where he'd hidden before, and in crisis he reverted to the most important remembered geography available to him. Then the church gave them the next piece. Inside an old file drawer beneath a stained towel and another child's sock, detectives found a torn sheet of composition paper written in the same rough hand as the baseboard note. "My name is Oliver, my sister is Ruby. Mom is under the house." He said. No one looks under house. That sentence pushed the investigation into excavation. The house had only a shallow crawl space beneath the rear kitchen and hall. Ground-penetrating radar showed disturbed soil inconsistent with the age and maintenance profile of the property. Excavation started the next morning. They found the body before lunch, adult female, wrapped in contractor plastic and carpet underlay, concealed in disturbed earth. Blunt force trauma to the skull. Postmortem interval indicating she had been dead for months before the call. For a few hours, the investigation felt like it had finally anchored. There was a mother. There was a homicide. There would now be a missing person match. There wasn't. No open current missing report fit. No mother with 2 children. No Oliver and Ruby. No linked family violence file involving that house. That was the next horror. A murdered woman under a vacant property. 2 children clearly tied to her, one of whom had called 911. And officially, they still did not exist. Sarah changed strategy. Instead of current reports, she looked at older disappearances and non-escalated welfare concerns. Women marked transient. Women presumed to have left voluntarily. Cases where children were not independently entered because there was no active custody order, no stable school enrollment, no aggressive reporting family. This is where systems often become most dangerous. Not when they fail loudly, but when they fail administratively. 3 counties away, in a stack of stale domestic files, she found Dana Mercer, 29. Reported missing by her sister almost 14 months earlier. The case cooled after initial follow-up because Dana had a history of leaving abusive partners, unstable housing, and long periods of inconsistent contact. She had hinted before that she wanted to drop off the map. For a while, she had 2 children, Eli and Rosie, not Oliver and Ruby, the daughters age fit. The boys likely age fit too. The boyfriend in Dana's history used multiple names and had prior assault, unlawful restraint, and parole violation records. He worked temporary maintenance and property cleanup jobs, often cash-based, often through subcontract chains weak enough to disappear inside. His real name was Aaron Pike. The female remains under the house were identified as Dana Mercer. The child blood from the sock and bathroom trace were maternally consistent with Dana's line. Now, the children had real names, and the false names from the note and 911 call started to make sense. Children kept under control for long periods are often taught false names, false birthdays, false stories. It helps offenders move them. It confuses schools, clinics, police, neighbors. It weakens the reliability of any disclosure they might make under stress. Aaron Pike had not simply hidden them physically. He had worked to erase them conceptually. That was when the investigation became statewide. Detectives pulled every property Aaron Pike had touched through labor. Records, subcontract contacts, parole reporting, code enforcement jobs, and informal cash work. Vacant homes, church cleanouts, storage units, farm-out buildings, demolition prep sites. Any place that could hold people briefly without drawing notice. They also began reconstructing Dana Mercer's final year. That timeline was ugly. Repeated informal shelter contact. 2 emergency room visits with bruising she blamed on falls. At least 1 social services intake cut short before she provided a stable address. A gap in school documentation for both children. A previous welfare check where officers noted children present, no apparent immediate danger after Pike answered the door under a different name. A withdrawn protection order inquiry that never became paperwork. Each piece on its own had seemed survivable. Together they formed a road into disappearance. Meanwhile, church forensics added more. They found fibers matching the blankets from the house. Rosie's blood in low-volume stains on the basement floor, woman's hair consistent with Dana's brush samples, and one object that hit everyone harder than any forensic result had a right to a child's arithmetic worksheet. Single digit. Noted children present, no apparent immediate danger after Pike answered the door under a different name. A withdrawn protection order inquiry that never became paperwork. Each piece on its own had seemed survivable. Together they formed a road into disappearance. Meanwhile, Church forensics added more. They found fibers matching the blankets from the house, Rosie's blood in low-volume stains on the basement floor, woman's hair consistent with Dana's brush samples, and one object that hit everyone harder than any forensic result had a right to a child's arithmetic worksheet. Single digit, subtraction, wrong answers all over it. At the top in careful block letters the name Oliver, not Eli, which meant the false identity had been taught repeatedly, not just spoken under pressure. Hannah was interviewed again after this because detectives wanted every possible nuance from the call. Did the boy hesitate before giving the address? Yes. Did he seem like he was recalling or inventing names? The address seemed recalled. The name Oliver now, in hindsight, perhaps too smooth. Did he ever sound like he was looking around the room he claimed to be in? Not exactly. He sounded like he was. Listening suggests immediate danger nearby and darkness. Looking suggests orienting in visible space. He had spent almost the entire call listening. Then audio review found another buried detail. Near the end of the call, under a static burst, there was a fragment Hannah had not consciously processed in real time. She said, "If they come to the house first, we're gone." That line changed the emotional and investigative logic of the case in one stroke. Dana had prepared him. At some point before she died, she had made him memorize the house address and told him what to say if he ever got a phone. Listening suggests immediate danger nearby and darkness. Looking suggests orienting in visible space. He had spent almost the entire call listening. Then audio review found another buried detail. Near the end of the call, under a static burst, there was a fragment Hannah had not consciously processed in real time. She said, "If they come to the house first, we're gone." That line changed the emotional and investigative logic of the case in one stroke. Dana had prepared him. At some point before she died, she had made him memorize the house address and told him what to say if he ever got a phone. The house was a marker, a geographic confession planted in a child's memory. So when Eli finally got access to the burner phone in the church basement, he called 911 and gave the house. He was not mistaken. He was following instructions. The longer detectives worked the timeline, the worse it became. Dana had likely been killed months before the call. The children had then been moved between temporary holding points. The house had once been one of them, the church another, possibly an RV lot for a short period, possibly a foreman's trailer, possibly other places never identified. The reason no one linked them cleanly was not one dramatic bureaucratic error. It was cumulative neglect, a missing woman written off as voluntarily unstable, children not properly tracked because of fractured schooling and informal care, an abuser with aliases and transient work, vacant properties no one monitored closely, a social world in which neighbors noticed enough to feel uneasy but not enough to act. Aaron Pike was eventually tracked through a chain of surveillance, gas purchases, and a stolen card incident at a rural service station. He was arrested near a motel 2 counties over. He was alone. At first, he denied everything, then denied knowing Dana, then denied knowing any children, then refused further questions. But the truck told on him. Fibers matching church basement blankets. Sediment consistent with the property crawl space. A child's fever reducer. And in a hidden door compartment, a folded paper map with a route marked toward family land near a floodplain where Pike's uncle had once kept a hunting cabin. Search teams went there immediately. Rosie was found in a locked utility cellar beneath the cabin, alive, malnourished, dehydrated, bruised, a healing cut near the hairline. Terrified of male footsteps, terrified of doors opening inward. The rescue footage was sealed, but everyone who saw her condition carried it hard. She asked for Eli before she asked for water. Eli was not there. The search widened across the floodplain, drainage ditches, brush line, and abandoned access roads. He was found 6 days later. The official details remained restricted, but homicide was clear. Rosie's later forensic interview completed the emotional truth of the case. Their mother had indeed forced Eli to memorize the house address. She made him say it over and over whenever Pike left them alone. She told him
that if he ever found a phone, he must tell police that house because that house was where the truth stayed. He used the names Oliver and Ruby because Pike had beaten them for using their real names around strangers. He said he was in the closet because the closet in the house had once been their hiding place. He said the man was upstairs or downstairs according to the memory pattern of danger, not literal geography. And when he heard officers in the house, he believed for one brief and devastating stretch of time that rescue had worked. That detail is what destroyed many of the people involved, because the church basement sat close enough behind the lot that commands shouted inside the house could carry across the rear line at night. Doors, boots, voices, sirens outside. Eli had almost certainly heard all of it. So imagine that moment from his side. He finds a phone, he whispers.
He remembers the address his mother drilled into him. He hears a calm adult voice stay with him. Then he hears police arrive. For a few seconds, maybe longer, he must have believed the world had finally understood him. And somewhere nearby, Aaron Pike heard them too. Internal review found no major procedural violations. Dispatch responded correctly. Patrol arrived fast. The address given was treated appropriately. The initial search of the house was thorough based on known information. Everything was defensible. That never helped much, because cases like this are not lived on paper. They are lived in the gap between almost and enough. Almost enough to decode the child. Almost enough to widen the perimeter faster. Almost enough to save both children. Almost enough to keep Dana from slipping so completely before the murder. The case later became a restricted training example for emergency communications, child harm investigations, and domestic violence crossover units. Not because it was the most violent case on record, because it illustrated something far more dangerous than open chaos. How horror can become invisible while still leaving traces everywhere. A child at a window no one checked twice. A woman who kept trying to enter systems not built to hold unstable lives. A house that looked occupied but not real. A church basement close enough to hear rescue. A 911 call technically routed, emotionally clear, and procedurally true, yet still not understood fast enough. People later called it the call from the family that didn't exist. But that phrase was wrong. They did exist. The real horror was that they had been disappearing in increments for so long that by the time one child finally got through to 911, almost every structure around them had already learned not to look hard enough. And maybe that is the image that stays. Not the crawl space. Not the church. Not the worksheet under the false name. Not the contractor plastic beneath the kitchen. A 9-year-old boy in the dark beside his injured sister, whispering into a taped-together phone, trying to turn terror into a usable address, trying to be brave quietly, trying not to get her hurt, trying to remember exactly what his mother had told him, trying to describe the center of danger to adults he had never met, then hearing the sirens, hearing boots in the house, hearing rescue come close enough to feel real. That is why the story lasted. Not because it was supernatural, because it was procedural. Believable, human. A child did almost everything right, and the world almost understood him in time. Once Dana Mercer's name surfaced, investigators began collecting every minor institutional record attached to her final year. None of them, by themselves, would have justified the level of alarm the full case eventually demanded. That was the problem. One clinic visit where bruising was explained away. One partial social services intake ended early. One school office note about unenrollment. One welfare check closed after a man answered the door and the children appeared physically present. One call to a legal aid office that never became a filing. One sister who worried, but lived too far away to insist hard enough. Each document reflected a small failure of continuity. Together, they formed the exact shape predators depend on. A life fragmented enough that concern never fully accumulates. Detectives never publicly released how many written fragments they found across the house and church. Some were too damaged to interpret fully. Some contained only repeated names, likely false ones. Some had numbers written over and over, possibly the house address rehearsed from memory. One scrap reportedly contained only this sentence: "If she sleeps, he gets mad." Another simply said, "We be good now." These were not evidence of plot. They were evidence of adaptation. The children had learned the rules of surviving one more day. Sarah Leland later said the most chilling part of the house was not the body under it, but the children's bedroom upstairs. It looked close enough to normal that a fast glance might have accepted it. Blankets, child cup, bed, closet. But it had none of the natural disorder children create. No stuffed animal worn bald at one ear. No shoe pair where one shoe had drifted away. No sticker book, no crayon mark. It was a room assembled by someone who understood function without understanding childhood. It existed to contain children, not to let them live. The house was empty when police arrived. But the fear on the call was real. The mother under the floor was real, and somewhere just beyond that property line, 2 children were still waiting in the dark. Some stories stay frightening because they are unsolved. This one stayed frightening even after it was solved, because a child came heartbreakingly close to being understood. And close was not enough. If you want, I can do the next step and turn this into either